So, welcome everybody. This is the second workshop in a series of workshops we're presenting for the NHT network. This afternoon we're going to be looking at recruitment, selection, induction, and some top tips to reduce turnover and get it right the first time. It's really interesting. When I first started delivering these workshops, it was all about minimising the number of applicants, and then we went through a phase where it was maximising the number of applicants because we weren't getting enough. And then I was reading, it must have been over the weekend, about this problem with employers being inundated with job applications because people are just using ChatGPT to write them and send them. So depending on the role you're looking for, there'll be different tips and tricks as part of that sort of recruitment process. So general nature, happy to discuss any specific circumstances outside of this session. But what we're going to look at is laying the groundwork for recruitment, the selection process, as well as the induction process. And we've used the analogy of planting the seed. So when we bring people into our organisation, thinking about them as, we need to nurture them and look after them so that they can be successful in their roles, or at least if it doesn't work out, be confident that we've done everything we could to support them to be successful in their so the groundwork for recruitment is really that planning process and identifying the need to recruit, which is usually if somebody's left the business or the organisation, or if we've got some new funding or a new project that requires us to recruit new employees. Undertaking a bit of an assessment of the needs and then working out where we're going to actually find these people. So the last session we looked at preparing a really good job description. And if you didn't see that session, I strongly recommend you having a look at that, because that's really about how we identify what sort of person we're looking for, what skills, knowledge and experience that they would need to be successful in the role, what are our not negotiables, and what are the things that we can potentially teach people on the job so that we are, I guess, opening up the pool of potential applicants as broad as it needs to be to attract the right person, but not so broad that you have every person that's looking for a job applying for that position. I would always suggest when we're recruiting to be looking internally to see whether or not we have anybody within the organisation that might be suited to that role. Particularly important from a professional growth and development perspective for people, that they can see that there are other opportunities within our organisations. And a lot of, houses and NHT itself, they're not massive organisations with really big, organisational charts and lots of different layers. So sometimes it might not be a move, it might be somebody looking to move sideways and either grow their skills and knowledge, or leverage some existing skills and knowledge that they might have. And then looking whether or not this is actually an external appointment. So, if you're looking for a house manager and you're the president, then you might have a look within the organisation and go, look, we don't actually have anybody with the skills and experience we're looking for. So we might go external for that. So as I said, the last session we did job analysis and job descriptions, and the job description is really the thing that we'd be looking at when we're looking at the selection criteria for the role. So what sort of things do we expect the successful candidate to have, and then laying those out in the selection criteria for the job ad. Bearing in mind you will have generally essential and desirable. Don't get too excited when you're doing your essential criteria. What can be taught, and somebody doesn't necessarily have to have 17 years experience in doing something to be good at it. It might be the transferable skills that you're looking for. So just be very pragmatic about that selection criteria. I think sometimes people can put a lot of things in selection criteria, which means that people that would be suited to the roles will self-select out. And this is particularly relevant for women. So the statistics say that if women can't meet 100% of the selection criteria, in many cases they will not apply for the job. And if men meet about 50% of the selection criteria, they will apply for the roles. So even in the rigidity or the length of our selection criteria, you might have people self-selecting out of the roles that could actually be very good at them. So try and be a little bit flexible when it comes to that. So there's a lot of things that we cannot put into our job ads, anything that would be perceived as being discriminatory. As an example here, unfortunately, the successful applicant will not be an over-entitled millennial with an inflated sense of entitlement. I don't think anybody on this session would be doing that. But Fair Work actually do have the right to tell you off and potentially fine you if you have anything illegal in your job ads. We also want to make sure that they're very clear, particularly if you do have a fixed term role, that's also very clear within that, that job advertisement. Most of the roles that you would be recruiting for that are fixed term would be allowed under the legislation, given that the bulk of your revenue comes from government grants. We just need to make sure that they're aligned to the terms of the grantee. So when you're thinking about recruiting, there's a number of channels that you can use. So as I said before, you might look for internal candidates, invite them to apply. It's a great opportunity to give people feedback. So if somebody is looking to step into a different role, but they don't necessarily have the skills, knowledge or experience you're looking for, it's a really good opportunity to actually have a development conversation with them and talk to them about what the gaps might be and what sort of things we can do within our organisation to help close off those gaps. So if I did want to be, you know, the house manager, and you know full well that I might not be suited yet, what is it that I need to work on so I can get there? And then that can be a really great way to engage people and help develop them within the organisation, even though they don't get what they want. We can show them that we're willing to help them create a pathway to get there. Word of mouth is a very effective recruitment strategy. About half of all of the jobs that are available within Tasmania are not advertised. It is done through our networks. The upside of that is that you don't need to go through the formal recruitment process and manage a whole bunch of applications and interview people, lots of people and those sorts of things. However, the downside of that is that you may be missing out on a better candidate because you haven't gone out externally to your organisation to attract them. So it's a bit of a thinking about what the role is and, you know, do we think we've got through word of mouth or through our networks, we can access the right person, or do we think we might actually be able to find somebody that has more suited skills and experience for that role? The regional jobs hubs, so you'd most likely be aware of these as the state funded resource. So there is one of these that covers every local government area in Tasmania, and they work with voluntary job seekers and employers and organisations within their regions to help get more local people into local jobs. It's a free service, and again, they tend to have very good networks. A lot of their job seekers are people that are already employed, or they are people that are looking to return to the workforce that aren't eligible for Centrelink or whatever government supports might be available, usually because their partner earns too much money or something like that. So that's a really good spot to go and have a chat to, just in case they're aware of somebody that might be suitable. And then we have government funded Workforce Australia or transition to work providers, or you could also look at DES, so disability employment service providers. Lots of support available from those organisations if there are some modifications that need to be made to the workplace, or if the person needs some additional assistance to transition into that role. Good old Seek. You know, I used to think it was a very expensive service, but now I've used it a few times. It's quite handy in the way that you can shortlist your candidates. It gets your job out to quite a broad range of potential candidates, but it is, you know, $380 a pop. So, you know, again, you want to kind of make sure you're going to get your return on investment from that. I know Ethical Jobs is something that the community services sector use. And then you've also got fee-for-service recruitment agencies, which can be very expensive. So usually between 5 and 10% of the annual salary, but you do get a bit of a warranty with that. So if the person leaves within 12 months, they will recruit a replacement for you for free. So I might just stop sharing for a second. Has anybody else got any other channels that you use for recruitment that you think is worth sharing?
I might just jump in and say that, sorry, you can hear me good? Yep.
Yes.
We're currently advertising for a replacement for myself in the president role and some more general board members for our board. And we've got a real increase in the number of migrant Nepalese community members coming to our centre. So we've reached out directly to the Migrant Resource Centre to advertise, particularly to people from that community.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you jumped on, then I was also thinking, like, depending on what you're looking for, you can use social media. So, you know, things like, well, LinkedIn is a certain kind of demographic of people, but also, you know, from if you're looking for volunteer board members, putting it out on things like Facebook. I know there was a real run for tourism and hospitality using Gumtree to find employees. You know, there's lots of creative things out there, and you still occasionally see a sign stuck on somebody's door looking for to recruit somebody. Yeah, so there's a range of different channels we can use, and I guess it's about trying to work out who you're trying to recruit and where you're most likely to find them. Any questions or comments before I go back to the... No, we're all good. Excellent. Right, I haven't forgotten to let. No. All right. Sorry, I'm a bit clunky. On this one. So we've looked at some potential channels. I think one of the most challenging things about recruitment is allocating the time to do this well. So if you've applied for a job in the last few years, it's generally a pretty soul-destroying experience. You know, you don't really hear back from employers, which then, you know, creates, I guess, a feeling about your organisation. You know, I applied for a job with the TCCI and nobody bothered getting back to me. And so when those candidates hear your brand, they actually think less of your brand because of the experience they've had with you through the recruitment process. And so I always think about recruitment as a marketing exercise. So just because somebody's not necessarily applying for a job with you, they might still be looking at your job ad. It blows my mind how many people I know that actually really like their jobs but are always looking at jobs on Seek. And it's really just an out of interest thing. So remember that when we're putting something together, that recruitment is advertising, and that we need to have a plan in place, because the other mistake we make is taking too long to get back to people. So before I would even put a job ad up, I would have times blocked out in my calendar. So, you know, I would have the job ad up for 3 to 4 weeks potentially. And then once the job ad closes, I would have some time allocated so that I can immediately shortlist my candidates and have time slotted in for the interviews. If you're going to have a panel, make sure that the panelists are available and book them in, so that you've got a plan from the start of that recruitment process to the appointment. And so you would nearly have a date that you will have that decision made on. And that keeps everybody in line, and it's clear to everybody what the process is. And we don't go, oh my God, the job ad closed 2 weeks ago and I still haven't gotten back to anybody. Because the other thing that happens is that people will get offered another job. It's something we hear so much more these days, that by the time we've got around to offering that person that position, they've taken a position with somebody else. And so we might have actually just missed out on the best employee ever, because we didn't have nice tight timeframes around things and just get that process done and the person appointed. So the ADA stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. And it's a marketing term. But when we think about our job advert, we want to get people's attention. So we want to make sure that we've got a good header, so the job title is reflective of what that particular role is. We want to get people's interest. So we would talk about what the job does, and, you know, particularly in the community services sector, you know, how you're actually helping people within your community, or what contribution that job makes to your organisation. And then we want to get people to desire to actually do that job. And I was looking at a couple of job ads a few months ago, and it was really interesting, the difference between workplaces that have a great culture will generally communicate that in a job ad. So it's not about, here's the job I've got to offer and here's all the things I want you to do, apply, and the end. It's, here's the job we've got on offer, this is what's in it for you, and this is why you want to come and work for our organisation. And that can be really hard if you've been in an organisation for a long time, to actually think about why would I want to come and work for the Derwent Valley Community House? You know, what's going to bring me to you instead of somebody else that might be offering a similar position, and really selling that to people. So, you know, if we're a great employer, we do all of these great things with our employees, we do these great things with our community, you know, be a part of this, as opposed to here's the job, take it or leave it. And so then the action is obviously getting people to apply for that position. Being really clear about a cover letter and a resume. It's quite difficult to recruit somebody off a resume alone. And asking for a cover letter and a resume also helps you identify where people are not following the instructions provided in the job ad. And a lot of the time that's enough for me to actually rule somebody out. If they can't give me a cover letter to go with their resume, then immediately that person goes on to my no thank you list, because it was quite a simple instruction. And give some people some information about what you want to see in that cover letter. So a few cover letters we had for a business traineeship position was literally just, I'm writing to apply for this job, thanks, bye. And it's like, you gave me a cover letter, but it didn't really tell me anything. So, you know, help people be successful in applying for that job. Make sure that we are realistic. So one of the things that when you go on to Seek and they give you some hints and tips is make sure you put salary in there. You don't want to find your dream candidate and then find out that they want $70,000 a year more than you can afford to pay them, which is another reason why we really want to sell the benefits. If you're a flexible workplace, then that's worth a significant amount of money to some people. So we just need to be very realistic about that, and we want to kind of try and persuade the right people to apply with the sorts of language we use. So if you had a role and you needed somebody to be there during certain times of the day, then you would need to articulate that in the job ad. So, you know, maybe this job is office-based, you know, we need somebody to be here between 9 and 12. However, you know, flexible working arrangements can be negotiated outside of these hours. There's more and more people that have an expectation that they can just perform their job from home, and that's great, but it's also really difficult to build a great workplace culture when people are not in the actual workplace enough. So, as I said before, these are some of the things that I would have in my job ad. I would, obviously, the job title. You can get pretty creative with job titles if you so wish to, but just make sure that we're not calling somebody a manager if they're not actually managing anything. I often joke that if you expect everybody to do everything, put coordinator on the end of their job title, because coordinator is code for everything nobody else wants to do. In your job ad, talk a little bit about your workplace culture, the essential information about the job, the benefits of working for you and why you and not somebody else, which is also marketing. What's your unique selling point? I'd absolutely include something about your organisational values and making sure we have that salary in there as well. And I pulled this off Seek last week because I thought it would be quite useful. There's 3 different examples that are on Seek. Like if you just do how to write a job ad that stands out, then it comes up quite quickly. But as you'll see, it's got the salary in there. It's nicely laid out. You know, why would you join us? I love that they start with that. Here's some information about the role. Here's some information about the sort of person we're looking for, and here's some information about our organisation. And they've got a nice tone. So you know, that's where I guess things like ChatGPT and those sorts of things can be quite helpful if you want to kind of make it sound fun or dynamic or, you know, modern, whatever it might be. And then it sort of helps to sort of convey a bit of your workplace culture just in the language that we choose. So I thought that was a nice little example, but, you know, the salary is upfront. It's not a secret. And salary range is quite interesting. I know that a lot of your roles would be governed by budget, but it will actually tell you when you put a job into Seek what the expected salary range would be for that kind of position and where your salary offer sits compared to that. So if you are sitting quite low, that's where that why would you want to work for us becomes really important. And most people that work or are looking for work in the, you know, community services space understand that, you know, they're not going to be getting paid $5 billion a year to do a project officer role or a house manager role. All right. So that's that. Nobody's got any questions yet, do you? I'm just looking here. Stick your hand up or just yell at me if you want to ask anything. Okay, so we've got a job description, we've got a job ad, we've decided where we're going to advertise that job. And when we start getting some applications in order to vet those applications, we kind of want to be thinking about what are we looking for when it comes to shortlisting. So have they given us the cover letter we asked for? Have we got a resume? Do they have skills, knowledge and experience that are aligned to what we were looking for? This is important from a compliance perspective as well. So the process of advertising that job through to selection should be very well documented in the fact that when we were shortlisting, we were looking for people that had this sort of experience or these sorts of qualifications or these sorts of interpersonal skills or whatever it might be, so that we can justify the decision we make. So people can come back to you and say, why didn't I get that job? And we need to be able to demonstrate that the reason they weren't interviewed or the reason they didn't get that job was because they didn't meet the criteria. And if that is vague or unclear, then it leaves the organisation exposed to a potential claim of discrimination. And I'm not saying that anybody would discriminate, but it's really about making sure that it's a very transparent process. So when we are shortlisting, we don't just go, I don't like the sound of that person's name, or I don't like the suburb they live in, or that person must be about this age. And I've worked for somebody that did this once and went, oh, that person's about 30. How do you know they're not going to go off and have a baby? And I'm like, well, you don't, but you certainly can't decide whether or not you're going to interview them based on that. And then, so we shortlist. Ideally, I wouldn't want to be interviewing any more than probably 4 or 5 people for a role. But you might have a different view on that. If it is a frontline entry-level role that's got lots of demand for it, there are other ways that you can recruit or decide who you're going to recruit other than interviewing. So you can do things like, you can have a bit of an interview session where you might bring everybody in and you might break them up into groups and get them to do like a little exercise or activity. I know a few organisations that do this. There's the old, you could give them a bag of marshmallows and a bag of spaghetti and then get them to build the tallest tower. We're not looking to see who can build the tallest tower. We're looking at how people interact with each other. So who was communicating well, who was listening, who was asking questions, who was taking the lead. And, it tells a lot about somebody when you throw them into a group of strangers and ask them to undertake an activity. So there is that opportunity to do that, or you might get them to undertake some tasks. So as long as you're not asking them to do actual work that somebody should be getting paid to do, you can have like a short, sharp session where you might get somebody to review a letter or send you an email or process an invoice or something so that you can actually see what they're able to do instead of just getting them to talk about it. I have a bit of a view that often people that interview well, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be great at the job. I know lots of people that interview terribly that are highly skilled people, but because of the interview process, they're not in a position to be able to sell themselves. It's just not how they work. And especially people applying for support roles. So people that want to be of service to other people are generally not people that are very good at selling their skills and their knowledge and their experience. They'll feel quite uncomfortable about doing that. I'm just going to stop that for a second. I actually listened to a Listen Able podcast with Dylan Alcott the other day, and they had a woman on there. Does anybody listen to this? They actually had a woman on there who she was diagnosed with ADHD and autism, and she started her own company, and they must do something creative. And she was talking about all the things that she had done in her workplace to embrace neurodivergent employees. And it was absolutely inspiring and amazing to listen to, and it made me start to rethink how we recruit. So one of the things that they did was that they actually give people the interview questions a week before the interview. so that they can actually study those questions and come in really well prepared. And I know lots of employers be like, well, I'm not doing that, because then they can go and do research and they can make up the answers and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, well, no, it's not what it's about. Like, an interview is not about tripping people up and trying to trick them into giving you the wrong answer. An interview is designed to set people up to bring their best self. And that was what she said. We do everything we can in the interview to let them walk out of the interview feeling like they nailed it. And I just thought that that was really cool. So, you know, when you're thinking about that interview process, do consider providing interview questions before the interview, just so that people can do a little bit of preparation, and maybe it gets rid of some of those nerves and allows people to kind of shine more effectively. Is that something, does anybody do that already? Send interview questions out before the interview? Yeah. Yeah. And then if they're not sure what you're asking, or if they want to check anything, they come back to you. All right. Any other questions or comments before I kick back off again? That vetting process, as I said, you know, have a method that's transparent and consistent in how we shortlist. Should be based on your job description and the essential criteria, and obviously relevant experience, and potentially put some weights on those. But in many cases, it's quite easy to go, well, they don't have that, or they don't have that, or they don't have that. If you don't have a whole bunch of applicants and you are looking to interview the least worst candidate because none of them really meet your expectations, can I suggest that you think about reframing the job or advertising it somewhere different? We've done this before, where we've hired the least worst person, and it generally results in quite quick turnover, because we kind of intuitively knew it wasn't the right person, but we took them because it was the best of a bad bunch. And what we probably should have done is gone away and thought about the job and what we might be able to change in how we communicated or what we're offering, to potentially find someone more suitable. Yes, no, maybe. The maybes are usually if I don't have enough yeses to have enough people to interview. But again, if they're on the maybe, then why are they a maybe? And is it because we've already got a lot of yeses, but we still want to interview them? Or is it because we're not sure if we're going to have enough suitable candidates? So we do have to be a bit honest with ourselves. And even though we're often under time pressures to recruit, we're better off to take our time and get the right person than we are to potentially hire the wrong person a couple of times, which has, you know, cost implications. It's quite expensive recruiting people, but it also will have a pretty serious impact on your culture, particularly if you've got a small workplace. You know, so we're better off finding the right person. So recruitment problems or suggestions. So only one person applies. Well, if they have all of the skills, knowledge and experience you're looking for, then that's amazing. It's hopefully going to speed up the process for you. But if not, as I said, we've done some, you know, out of desperation, but in hindsight, it was a good thing. We worked out a few times that we were looking for a unicorn. So basically, you know, somebody that doesn't actually exist. And so what we did was we actually consulted with our team and we broke the job up, and we found some people in our team that could take some of the things out of the unicorn job we were looking for. And so we kind of reshaped that particular role so that we weren't looking for somebody that, you know, had a whole bunch of things that, that we were looking for somebody that was actually achievable to find in the market. So sometimes that can be an option. Other times it might be going, well, we only have this much money for the job, so maybe we need the person to be part-time instead of full-time if it's a salary issue. But yeah, just thinking about some creative ways that you might be able to adjust the job or the tasks that job is responsible for to appeal to more people. No suitable talent amongst the candidates. I'm a big fan of the vocational education and training system, so I would often be looking to see whether or not we can find somebody that's got the transferable skills, but maybe not necessarily the industry experience or the exact qualifications we're looking for, if you can be flexible about qualifications. and looking whether or not we can actually grow somebody into that particular role, even by accessing, and it's a great thing, you're part of the NHT network, potentially accessing a mentor or a coach from a different house or somebody from NHT to help build the capability of somebody that might not have everything we need right now. As I said before, the failure to get back to all candidates. Nobody likes telling people they were unsuccessful for a role. But it is really important that we close out that if somebody's taken the time to apply for a position with us, it is important that we get back to them. If you aren't shortlisting them, then let them know straight away, which is one of the reasons I like Seek. We just go not suitable, not suitable, not suitable, send a thing to all the candidates. And look, if I applied for a job and I didn't get it, I don't want to talk to you about it. I'd much rather you send me an email that says I didn't get it, because that's just awkward for everybody. And then one of the other mistakes that isn't actually on here is telling all the people that didn't get the job that they didn't get the job before we actually offer the role to the person who is successful. And as I said, more and more often we are having people coming back and say, actually, I've already got another job, or I've decided I don't want that job anymore, thanks. So I absolutely wouldn't notify the unsuccessful candidates if they were like a close second or third, until the successful candidate has signed the employment contract and agreed that they're going to take the role. And it's a good idea to do a bit of a debrief at the end of the process, just to see what worked and what didn't, what would we do differently next time. Keeping some notes around, the things that you want to remember to either do or not do when you recruit again, especially if you don't do a lot of recruitment. Like if you're only recruiting once or twice a year, then having some notes around, oh, that worked really well, we've got to do that again, or actually it didn't work very well and try this next time. So selection and interviewing, again, we like to make it easy for people. I'll generally send them an email or a text message after I've spoken to them with an interview time and a place. Think about who you should have on the interview panel. Is it just going to be you? Do you want somebody that is either performing the role now or somebody they might be working with? Depending on how formal it is, like, you could just do a one-on-one, but sometimes it's nice to have a second opinion. And, from a house perspective, you might have somebody from the board and an employee or a manager on your interview panel. It has to have a level of structure, again, from an equity and transparency process. But I do like making sure that we take a few minutes at the start of that interview process to make people feel comfortable. And it might be something as simple as, how's your week been? How was your weekend? Or, what are you watching on Netflix, or whatever it might be. But just to give people a chance to catch their breath, get their heart rate down a little bit, and hopefully build a little bit of rapport with the interviewers before we launch straight into that interview. Interview questions. So there's a whole bunch of different types of questions that you can ask. Obviously, closed questions with a yes or no answer probably aren't going to be too conducive to getting to know somebody. But if you do have some not negotiables, like, do you have a working with vulnerable people check? Yes, no. I'd probably check that before I got them to an interview, which for most houses I imagine would be a mandatory requirement. But thinking about the sorts of questions we can ask that really tell you who that person is. And, tell me about a time when, whilst it's a bit of a cliche, it is quite a good way of getting people to talk to examples of where they've, resolved conflict or managed their time effectively. And one of the other types of questions I like to ask is situational questions. So if it's a small team, you're sitting at your desk, the phone's ringing, somebody's just walked in the front door, and you've just got an urgent email from the CEO saying that they can't make an appointment that's in 15 minutes time. What are you going to do? What sort of process will you follow? So they can also tell you a bit about somebody. One of the things that I deliver is a thing called DISC, which is communication and behaviour styles. And when you look at the 4 different styles, there is one style that is really good at solving problems. There is another style that is really good at influencing people through communication. There is another style that is very good at consistently, providing service and just being consistent and stable and loyal for the business. And there's another style that is very good at attention to detail. So when you think about what it takes to be successful in a role, yes, we would like somebody to have all four of those things, but what are the most important parts of the role so that somebody is going to be successful? Because I will come into an interview and I will convince you very convincingly that I have excellent attention to detail because I want that job. My attention to detail is atrocious. But I don't need to have a great deal of attention to detail to do my job. I need to be able to communicate effectively with a vast variety of people. So if you were interviewing for my job, that's the most important thing. Attention to detail, all very well and good over here, but do think in terms of that, those four things, what is the priority? And in the interview, you need to be able to ask some questions to establish that person has excellent attention to detail. That person's a really good communicator. That person's a really good problem solver. So I just always think that's important when we talk about recruitment, because when you think about the generic stuff in the criteria for jobs, we generally ask for all four of those things, but they can't all be equally important. Attention to detail, like if I was hiring somebody to do payroll or finance or something, I would absolutely be getting them to do something. So here's a invoice, tell me where the mistakes are, and get somebody to actually show that they have the ability to critique and find mistakes in things as a way to demonstrate that attention to detail. And also, if attention to detail is your thing, spelling mistakes and things in their cover letter and their resume are also very good tells. So you must have a consistent set of questions for each candidate. You can ask follow-up questions different to each candidate. But if you've got, say, 8 questions, then every candidate needs the opportunity to answer those questions so that we're making sure that it is a fair and equitable process for everybody. Obviously, the questions need to be related to the role. And as I said, I like situational questions because it gets people to sort of tell you a bit of a story about whatever you're trying to establish their knowledge on. As I said before, after listening to that podcast, I would never have an interview without giving people the questions prior to the interview. And what else can you do to give that candidate the opportunity to really shine and be successful in that interview process? Now, the interview questions should have some sort of scoring system or rating scale so that if you do have multiple interviewers, then you can actually, in a really objective way, assess how well each candidate answered those questions. And in theory, the summary of those scores for each candidate should be the way that you decide on who will get that position. So then if anybody did come back and say, I didn't get that job because you were discriminating against me, you've got a really nice document to demonstrate everybody was asked these questions. These were your answers to the questions. These were your scores. This was a score for the successful candidate. I'm sorry, you were unsuccessful, and here's some feedback on what you could do differently next time. And that all of this takes time. This is why recruitment goes pear-shaped so often, because we forget about all the detail in the actual process from advertising that job through to actually finding the successful candidate. Now, there are 2 schools of thought about referees, and one of them is that nobody's going to put a referee on their resume that would give them a bad reference. But sometimes it's about what the referees don't tell you, not what they do. And in terms of duty of care and managing risk, to not do a reference check is probably not a great idea. So undertake reference checks. Now, you can Google the person, and it's not a terrible idea to do that, because we've had a few employers that failed to Google somebody's name, and all you needed was a quick Google search to know that there is no way you would give that person that job. So whatever is freely available on the internet is fair game when it comes to doing some research. However, if you know somebody that has worked with that person or knows that person, you can ask them for information, but legally you cannot use the information you were provided in order to make a recruitment decision. And that can be really hard if you're in a smaller kind of community, which in many cases Tasmania just is generally. But yeah, it's if it was made public that you had made a recruitment decision based on some information that you shouldn't have actually had access to, you can find yourself in a little bit of hot water. Having said that, there's ways and means around that. So if somebody says, oh, that person's actually blah, 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 and you're like, ooh, and then you might think about how you might word some interview questions to capture that information in a more legitimate kind of way. But obviously making sure you're asking everybody the same questions. All right, so we've now found our successful candidate. We have offered them the job and they have taken the job. I'm just checking, nobody's got their hand up, nobody's got any questions. So, induction. Induction is so very important, but the probationary period itself is so very important. Because it's the only thing that we actually get from the Fair Work Act that gives us the opportunity to trial this employee and make sure they're going to be successful. So obviously there's a bunch of paperwork that we need to have, so induction checklists. I've actually been using the induction checklist off the Fair Work website. It's actually very good. And I feel like if you were ever audited or questioned by Fair Work and you pull out some of their templates, it's a really good way to earn some brownie points. It's like, oh, I did what your induction checklist told me to do. But induction is kind of where we set people up to either succeed or not. And part of it is about the compliance side of it and the I guess the nuts and bolts of here's the toilet, here's where you park, here's the fire exit, here's the first aid kit, here's your lunchroom, here's your desk, all of those sorts of things. But part of inducting somebody is helping them understand your workplace culture. So whenever we have somebody new in our organisation, I'll often sit them down with our organisation chart, just give them some information about what each person in our organisation does. How they like to be communicated with, and anything else that they should know about. So we have one person on our team who is amazing at their job, but if you commit them to a time to contact somebody without consulting with them first, they'll get really antsy about it. So I actually tell new people that. I'm like, this is this person, they're amazing, they've got all this great knowledge. If you need to get them to contact somebody, please discuss it with them before you commit them to a time, because they have, you know, other things that they do that aren't in the diary or whatever it might be. You know, so you kind of give them a bit of a heads up on some of the things that they should know about, but also like your general culture. So everybody around here will be happy to help you. Just ask, you know, this person's got good knowledge on that and this person's got good knowledge on that. All of those sorts of things, and then have a plan for them. So if I had $1 for every time an employer rang me up with a performance issue or somebody that they'd like to terminate, and they were, you know, a month, a week, a couple of months out of probation, I would be able to retire, I reckon. So if you have a head count of less than 15 employees, you have 12 months before somebody can make an unfair dismissal claim against your organisation. So that is effectively a 12-month probation period. Most organisations still run with 3, and that's perfectly fine if that's what you want to use. But under the Fair Work Act, an employee cannot make an unfair dismissal claim within the first 12 months for a small business. And if you have 15 or more headcount, then you have 6 months. So one of the things that I strongly recommend doing is putting together a new employee plan and scheduling check-ins with the new employee and anyone else that you might need to get some feedback on from their performance. So I'll come back to that in a second. Before they start, prepare for their arrival, which is making sure that they've got their IT set up or their vehicle or their uniform or whatever it is that they need to be able to do their job. And that it's all ready to go. So our laptops come from an IT provider, so we'll always log into the laptop before they come, make sure that they're actually working properly so that their first day isn't spent on the phone to IT with IT issues, because they are psychosocial hazards and we don't like those. I also like to either call them or send them a text message before their first day, just going, well, show up at this time, this is what we wear to work. We haven't got an oven, but we do have a microwave and a fridge, you know, parking's out the back, park wherever you like, all of those sorts of things that people would want to know before their first day. And then your induction checklist, I feel so bad. For many years, I used to go through the entire 40 pages of the employee handbook with people when they first started with me. I reckon they'd be lucky to remember 2% of it. So do make them aware of anything that could harm them in the workplace. So safety, if you collect private information, privacy requirements, key information about your workplace, who's who in the zoo, policies and procedures. So make sure we give them a copy of those so that they've got time to read them, where they should go to for help if they're not sure about anything. And that new employee plan is something that you can do over a 3, 6 or 12-month period, depending on the role. But it's kind of like, what would you expect them to know by the end of their first day, the end of their first week, the end of their first month, so that they can also do a bit of a self-assessment. Yes, I know how to send an email. Yes, I know how to access the CRM. Yes, I know how to, I don't know, prepare a new member pack. I know how to access information on the projects that we work, whatever it might be, but just a bit of a plan. And then making sure we have formal and informal check-ins with that new employee to let them know how they're going, but also make sure that get any feedback from them on how their new experience is going. So if we put those in our diary, we're much more likely to do it. Whereas if we go, oh, I'll just check in with them when I talk to them, A, you don't have anything documented that you've chatted to them, and B, you'll get busy. And if you're anything like me, you will forget to do it. So these are really important to identify gaps within that probationary period and try and address them. But also, if the person's doing a really good job, it's a really good formal check-in to go, I just want to let you know what a great job you're doing. You know, you've come, you know, you've learned so much, or you've been such a great asset since you started with us. Because assuming that that person knows they're doing a good job is very dangerous. So again, part of that planning process is making sure that we actually check in with a new employee for some two-way feedback. It's not just about us going, we're happy with you. Are you happy with us? And then I think the best and the most appropriate reason to terminate somebody's employment during probation is if they're not responding to feedback. And if you haven't given them any feedback, then you're not going to realise that they're not responding to it until it's too late. But also they might not realise, you know, they might be doing a really good job, nobody's given them any feedback, and then lose their motivation because nobody seems to care what a good job they're doing. So make sure that we make time for those and maximise that probationary period so that we can set them up for success or help them move on to something more suited to them if it's not working out. And if you do find you're having a lot of turnover with particular roles, then that to me is an opportunity for you to do a bit of a reflection on what's not working here. Is it us? Is it the sort of person we're recruiting for? Is it that we're looking for a unicorn that we're never going to find? But yeah, if you've got a lot of turnover in particular roles, then it's a good thing to have a look at what might be driving that. So onboarding is kind of like the cultural version of induction. Induction is checking a whole bunch of boxes to say, yes, we showed them that, yes, we've given them that. Whereas onboarding is kind of about that, understanding who you're working with, what are some easy wins in the role, you know, what's our culture like, who's their go-to person or their buddy or their mentor, and what will it look like when they've, you know, nailed it and they're being successful in their role. So they're kind of conversational things, but you can have a bit of a checklist for onboarding as well. All right, I feel like I've been talking at you, so I'm just going to stop. Questions, comments, suggestions, complaints?
I've got a question, not really a question, but I just wanted to get your input into something, Stacey. So I was asked recently to be part of a panel where I felt like my opinion on the candidate was a little bit undervalued, and to the point where that candidate ended up getting employed, even though I sort of had a few reservations. Just wondering what your, I suppose, thoughts on how I could have maybe handled that a bit better. Because now that the person's been employed, yeah, I think the whole thing probably could have been avoided.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be very diplomatic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's a big number of answers to that. So your reservations were aligned to some concerns around the person's skills, knowledge and experience against the selection criteria?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. look, I guess the short answer to that is that as long as you voiced those reservations, and if people chose to disregard those and that person still came out as the successful candidate, I'm going to be really cheeky here, be like, you bide your time and you go, I told you so.
Yeah.
Do you think upon reflection you could have, would you have done anything differently, or do you think that they were going to make the decision they were going to make regardless of the feedback you provided or the concerns you raised?
Yeah, I think the outcome was still going to be the same whether I had an opinion or not. Yeah. But it's just interesting because, yeah, I think I can see now where it's all starting to unravel, and your cheeky comment, yeah. It's like, well,
Is what you're doing right now.
yeah.
And look, I think I would store that for future reference though. Like if you gave your time and knowledge and expertise to sit on an interview panel and you raised legitimate concerns and they didn't want to listen to those, I've done this before and said, I'm not going to sit on a panel again because you will make the decision you will make.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like my views were given the the consideration that they should have been. So I, without knowing the context, and I appreciate that it's a bit hard actually, I might just stop the recording there.
Yeah, thanks for that.
We'll cut that bit off the end.
Yeah,
Somebody that